Hello and welcome to another session for MG316. Welcome back from the mid semester break. I hope you have had a good one. And now we will be continuing to look at employment relations in various countries. The countries that we have covered so far are UK, employment relations in UK, USA, and Japan. And in today's satellite tutorial, we are going to look at employment relations in Germany. Let's look at our outline. So some key themes, some historical data as well as background. We will look at our three usual actors: the government, the workers and their representatives, which are the unions, and employers and their associations. We will look at co-determination. This is one of the processes, employment relations processes, as well as collective bargaining and industrial disputes. And finally, we will look at some current and future trends and issues, and we will conclude. So, key themes. Germany is frequently seen as an example of a highly coordinated and regulated market economy. In the German employment relations system, employee interests are represented in a dual system: co-determination at workplace and company levels. So there is two places where co-determination takes place: co-determination at workplace and company levels, as well as collective bargaining at industry level. This is the duality. So a minority of employees enjoy this representation. However, this duality is slowly eroding. This duality is referring back to this co-determination at workplace and company levels and collective bargaining at industry level. We will look at these two things in depth in this tutorial. The number of industrial disputes is relatively low due to decentralization of system, a certain degree of cooperation and trust, and alternative dispute resolution mechanisms. Unlike what we have seen in USA and Japan, where things were usually decentralized, even the collective bargaining happens at the enterprise level. And in USA, the collective bargaining goes a level further down to plant level bargaining. However, in Germany, you will see that collective bargaining is centralized, taking place at the industry level. It is somewhat similar to UK, however different from UK as well, in the sense that UK's collective bargaining is moving towards decentralization, moving towards enterprise level collective bargaining. However, in Germany, this is not happening. All right, so these are some of the key themes. Let's look at our background or Germany's background. West Germany experience. Please note that there were two Germanys. We had the East Germany and the West Germany before what we now currently know as Germany, one Germany. So West Germany experienced very strong economic performance after the Second World War. The high productivity, high value added, high wage, high skill model lasted to the mid 1970s. The collapse of the Bretton Woods system and the oil crisis in the 1970s contributed to the economic decline in the West German economy. There was some recovery in the 1980s, but problems arose with the integration of socialist East Germany economy in the 1990s. And between the mid 1990s and the mid 2000s, economic growth was low and unemployment high. The political system has been continuous and stable. Germany is a federal system, but employment relations policy is uniform across. states in contrast to Canada or the US. So the political system in Germany has been quite continuous and stable. In fact, well, they don't have a prime minister, however, they have chancellors. And the chancellor of Germany is Angela Merkel, and she has been in power, I think, from 2005 now. So the political system is continuous and stable. I think she belongs to the political party of Christian Democratic Union. And Germany also has federal and state systems. However, unlike what we have seen in USA, whereby there are variations in policies, one state has got a different minimum wage, the other state in USA has got a different minimum wage. But that is not the case in Germany. Everything is uniform. Looking at employees and their associations, so there are three types of employee organizations in Germany. These are, we have got the BDI, we have got BDA, and we have got Chambers of Industry and Commerce. Note that these are the acronyms BDI and BDA, and these acronyms are derived from their German names. Please do not ask me to pronounce those German names. I cannot pronounce those German names. What you can do is learn these acronyms, and you can use them while doing your assignments or in your exams as well. So you do not need to know the German names. So the first one is the business or trade associations, which represent general businesses and the product market interest, as well as lobbying the government. That is the BDI. The BDA is the Special Employer Association engaged in social policy, employment relations, and collective bargaining. So this is the main one, BDA, which is responsible for employment relations things related to employers. And finally, we have chambers of industry and commerce. So employer associations, which are responsible for collective bargaining, represent firms according to industries as well as regions. Membership density is estimated to be high but has declined in recent decades, and this has been the case as well as for UK, US, and Japan. And we have seen that trade union density has been declining, as well as employer density is also declining. So less and less businesses are becoming or are being affiliated with employer associations. So membership density is estimated to be high but has declined in recent decades. All member companies must abide by the collective agreements that their employer association negotiates with a union, a system which has caused dissatisfaction among small and medium enterprises, SMEs, small and medium organizations. In an attempt to counter membership loss, some associations allow company members to be members, or some associations allow companies to be members without being bound to collective agreements. So, in order to have the membership density high or not to lose membership, what some employee associations are doing is that they allow companies or organizations to be members without having the need to abide by whatever collective agreements that they negotiate with the union. And this usually would apply to small and medium enterprises, because this system whereby all the member companies must abide by the collective agreements that was negotiated by the employer association with the union caused dissatisfaction to small and medium enterprises. So now the small and medium enterprises would want to be members, and they can get some advice on how to do collective bargaining, on how to resolve disputes, in the organization, so they will get help from the employee association, but they do not have to directly abide by the collective agreement that the employee association has negotiated with a trade union. All right, so that's employees and the association. The next ER actor, unions. So unions were established after the Second World War according to the principles of industrial unionism and unitary unionism. Industry unions engage in collective bargaining, whilst the peak federation, called DGB, again, DGB is the acronym which has been derived from the German name, is responsible for political activities. So DGB is responsible for the political activities such as lobbying, whereas industrial unions, they engage in collective bargaining. Note the umbrella body. The umbrella body is DGB. The organizational structure of unions was stable until the mid 1990s, when shrinking membership, decreasing financial resources, and structural changes led to a flurry of measure activity. Now there are 8 DGB affiliated unions, and these are big unions which are affiliated with the umbrella body. Moving on, unions have been losing membership since the 1990s, and the density has been at an all-time low of 20% since the early 2000s. Well, actually, it is better than USA, isn't it? USA's trade union density is somewhere around 10 or 11%, so still better than that. But the unions have been losing members, and the membership is declining. Losses contributed to a decline in union bargaining power and the rise of a major non-union sector. Union membership is concentrated among skilled male full-time workers in the manufacturing and the public sectors. And this is what we also saw in Japan as well, isn't it? That union membership was concentrated on the skilled male full-time workers, whereby women were mostly part-time workers and part-time workers were usually not allowed to join unions. And this has been the trend that the membership is always higher in public sector compared to the private industries. In order to strengthen their position, unions must organize groups who are underrepresented in membership. Example, women, young people, and highly skilled white collar and foreign workers. So these are the examples of underrepresented workers, the women, the young people, the highly skilled, the white collar, and foreign workers. So if unions want to increase membership, they need to represent these types of workers. Looking at our final actor, the government, German employment relations are characterized by a high degree of juridification. The Works Constitution Act regulates how an employer and a works council interact at the plant level. Co-determination acts regulate how an employer and employee representatives interact on the company level supervisory board. The Act on Collective Agreements regulates collective bargaining. The Constitution guarantees the right to freedom of association. An independent and specialized system of labor courts operate at local, regional, and national levels. These are mechanisms of resolving disputes. The social partners engage in collective bargaining without active state interference. Principle of free collective bargaining. The social partners are the employers, the management, and their representatives of the employer associations, and the workers and their representatives, which are the unions. So they engage in collective bargaining without much interference from the government. Employers frequently extend collective agreements to all employees so as to avoid providing incentives to join a union. So here, as we have seen in USA mostly, that employers they try to avoid unions at all cost, isn't it? Look at your own home country. If you're a working student, look at your own organization. Do the employers, does the management, they want unions, or they want to negotiate with you directly without you being represented by a union? So this is present everywhere, not just in USA or Germany, but all over the world. Employers and the management they usually want individual agreements, individual negotiations, not collective agreements. Industrial action is prohibited during the term of an agreement. Industrial actions such as lockouts and strikes, they are prohibited, they are not allowed during a term of agreement. The social partners have a high degree of freedom to determine their own structures and dealings. Example, mediation agreements are formed from voluntary negotiations between social partners without intervention. Now, even though the government has provided the labor courts at various levels to resolve disputes, things like conciliation and mediation, these type of things are given to the employers and the unions to negotiate how do they want these procedures to be to resolve disputes. So the state does not want to be involved in that. So they have got a high degree of freedom to determine this. The state has played an active role through corporatist arrangements, peaking in the late 1960s and the 70s. So that's all about the three actors in Germany. Now let's look at processes, and a very important process that we must mention while discussing Germany or Sweden. You will see in Sweden they also have got co-determination. Is this co-determination? So what is co-determination? Co-determination is simply decision making by two parties. Co-determination is the principal feature of employment relations in Germany, based on the idea of industrial democracy and cooperation. Co-determination at workplace level. Now, works councils have a set of rights on three sets of issues. These are economic and financial affairs, staff matters, and social issues. Rights range from information through consultation to binding co-determination and veto rights. These rights vary depending on the issue. The Works Constitution Act does not apply to very small enterprises or public sector employees and only partially covers not-for-profit or non-governmental non-governmental organizations. Co-determination at workplace level, still on that. So works agreements which are negotiated between employers and works councils on the basis of these rights cannot contradict industry-wide collective agreements. Works councils are legally independent and separate from the union, and are supposed to be detached from wages and income distribution matters. In reality, however, there is much overlap between the activities and membership of unions and works councils. So note that works councils are different from unions. In many enterprises, there are no works councils, as their election must be initiated by employees. For example, one half of all private sector employees are not covered by works councils. Thus, there is a growing representation gap. So, works councils have to be initiated by the workers in order to be there. And as a result, many organizations do not have works councils. And works councils have a number of rights, things like even looking into the financial affairs of the organization, staff matters, social issues. So the works councils are in fact quite powerful. So that's about co-determination, joint parties making decision. So the works councils, they represent the workers, right? And the management. So these people get together and they make decision, co-determination, making decisions together. Next is we look at the collective bargaining. There are three kinds of collective agreements in Germany. They have got wage arrangements fixed on the level of wages and their periodic increases. Framework agreements specify wage payment systems, and umbrella agreements regulate all other conditions of employment. Example, working time, overtime, holidays, and so forth. And this is similar to what we saw in Japan, whereby the wages would be during the Shunto season, the wages would be negotiated, the pay, separately from all other conditions. And that feature is also present here in Germany, that during the collective bargaining processes, the wages would be discussed separately, and there would be another umbrella agreement that regulate all the other conditions of the employment. In the majority of industries, collective bargaining takes place at the regional and industry levels. For example, between the regional branches of an employee association and the union associated with that industry. This tells us that collective bargaining takes place at a centralized level rather than at a decentralized level. I've mentioned this before, that collective bargaining takes place at a decentralized level if it takes place at the enterprise level or at plant level. And if it takes place at the industry level or at the regional level, then collective bargaining is centralized. And in Germany, collective bargaining is highly centralized in the sense that it takes place at a regional and industry levels. In UK, we saw that collective bargaining mostly takes place at the industry level, which is centralized, and then it is moving towards decentralizing, moving towards enterprise level collective bargaining. So it's one step up than what we saw in UK, that collective bargaining is highly centralized here. This structure has led to pattern bargaining, for example, pilot agreements in the metal and electrical industry may be transferred to other regions within the same industry and other sectors, that is, different industries. Recently, the number of collective agreements at enterprise level has increased. So, despite having most of the collective bargaining at regional and industry level, collective bargaining here is also to some extent trying to decentralize in the sense that it is now taking place at the enterprise level. And usually, small and medium organizations or enterprises would prefer collective bargaining at enterprise level rather than collective bargaining at a regional or industry level. Moving on, moderate level of centralization with coordinated collective bargaining, narrow wage differentials, although recently there has been a widening. Some companies negotiate enterprise agreements with unions outside of industry-wide agreement. We have not seen this in any other country, whereby the organizations they take a step beyond whatever already has been negotiated in the industry-wide agreement. They go one step further and negotiate enterprise agreements with the unions as well. The coverage rate of industry-level agreements has decreased to a crisis point. Less than 60% of employees in the Western Germany and 40% in the East Germany are covered by industry agreements. Even to the extent that some companies are escaping collective agreements, that is, they do not comply with certain provisions of the agreement despite being legally bound to do so. So, companies are doing everything that they want, everything that they can, not to engage with the unions, isn't it? So, they are escaping the collective agreement clauses that are present in the agreement, and even though they are legally bound to honor these provisions in the agreement. Industrial disputes. Industrial disputes are usually industry-wide within a certain region and are coordinated centrally by unions and employee associations. Strikes as well as lockouts are legal. Strikes is organized by unions, whereas lockouts is by the employers. Unions take ballots before a strike, and the ballots are prescribed by union rules, not legislation as in some other countries. A number of industrial disputes is low compared with other countries due to centralization of collective bargaining system, the cooperation and trust that is generated through co-determination, and the existence of alternative dispute resolution mechanisms such as conciliation, mediation, and arbitration. Arbitration represented by labor courts for all disputes of rights. Only conflicts about the terms of conditions of new collective agreements, dispute of interest, can be subject of legal sanctioned or legally sanctioned industrial action. So there are two types of dispute. We have got dispute of right and dispute of interest. When the workers demand a new condition, that is called, or new provision, that is dispute of interest. When employers fail to honor a provision already that is present in the collective agreement, that is dispute of right. A dispute of right is usually resolved through the conciliation in labor courts, whereas dispute of interest can be the subject of legally sanctioned industrial action, which is strikes and lockouts. Moving on, current and future issues, public sector employment. The state of Germany's largest employer and employment relations in the public sector are characterized by the distinction between public employees and civil servants, with terms and conditions set in different ways. Collective bargaining used to be highly centralized for all employees, but decentralization has occurred recently and is likely to continue, similar to what we have seen in other countries. Public sector employment has been decreasing since the mid 1990s. Privatization of national utilities has had some impact on the employment levels and practices. So, privatization is also taking place in Germany. Minimum wages. So, still on our current and future issues and trends. Minimum wages. A national minimum wage of 850 euro was introduced in 2015. Historically, extensive collective bargaining coverage provided the safety net. In recent years, collective bargaining has declined, and unions in industries they are struggling to secure adequate wages and working conditions, and this has led to the emergence of working poor. Now, governments they have amended legislations, they have amended laws to make it easier to declare industry-wide agreements as binding for all employers. In the future, the minimum wage is to be adjusted by an independent body. So currently, the government has set a minimum wage, and that was introduced in 2015. In future, it has been said that the minimum wage will be adjusted, and it will be done by an independent body. And that independent body would not just make the decision anyhow. Obviously, there would be research involved, looking at the employers, the impact on the economy, and as well as the workers, and then the independent body would obviously make the decision. Increasing flexibility. Since the early 1980s, the management and their associations have demanded more flexibility. Now, what does flexibility mean? Flexibility can mean temporal flexibility, flexibility in wages, salaries, functional and numerical flexibility, and also flexibility in forms of employment. Temporal flexibility has been a key collective bargaining concern, with unions winning reduced working hours in the 1980s and the employers resisting further reductions. In practice, working hours are flexible and individual working time accounts have been introduced for the majority of employees. So there is flexible working hours, unlike in most of the Western countries that we have seen. Even in the Pacific, usually we don't have flexible working hours. Effective working times are longer now, whilst part-time work has increased more than 25% of the labor force, leading to a polarization of working time. Wage and salary flexibility is also contentious. Labor's share of the national income is at historical lows, and inequality between the low and high paid workers has increased. Functional flexibility is not a central concern in the collective bargaining because the dual system of vocational training, that is, apprenticeships involving training at vocational schools and in companies. So, vocational training provides young people with a broad range of skills. That's functional flexibility. This coordinated training system has contributed to Germany's high skill, high wage model and competitive advantage over other countries. And this is somewhat similar to what we have seen in Japan, whereby the young graduates they are recruited by organizations and then they are molded into whatever the organization needs them to be. So something similar but different is present in Germany, whereby they have vocational training that provide these young workers with a broad range of skills. Flexibility in forms of employment has increased, as seen in increasing atypical employment. So, what is atypical employment? It's part time, petty employment, fixed term contracts, agency work, and solo self employment. The growth of non standard employment has increased tendencies of segmentation of the labor market into a co unionized and protected segment and a peripheral, unorganized, and unprotected segment. The consequences of these changes for employment relations practices are far reaching. And finally, we look at the decentralization of collective bargaining, current and future issues. Germany, like other countries, has moved towards a decentralized collective bargaining, that is, moving towards enterprise level collective bargaining. Variations must be negotiated between employers and the works councils at the company level and laid down in a works agreement. Works agreements are of growing importance as a result. Final decisions about substantive issues have gradually shifted to managers and the works councils, with a decline in the power of unions and employer associations. Thus, the formal structures of industry-wide collective bargaining have remained intact, but its outcomes and functions have changed significantly. So, collective bargaining is also declining in the sense that there is a decline in the power of unions and employer associations, and managers and works councils are more in control as to what is given and taken by the workers and the managers. Finally, to conclude, the traditional, highly integrated, highly regulated dual system is eroding. Since the early 1990s, changes to the key institutions and procedural rules of the German system have led to the greater variation in employment relations practices. Decentralization, the balance of power between unions and employer associations and employees and the works councils has shifted as the scope of negotiations at enterprise level has broadened. Alright, so this concludes employment relations in Germany. In our next satellite tutorial. Next week, we are going to look at employment relations in Sweden. Please note that employment relations in Sweden is not present in the current textbook, in the sixth edition of the textbook. However, it is present in, not remember in which edition. However, the textbook notes for employment relations in Sweden has already been uploaded to Moodle, and you can read that, please. And as usual, a copy of this satellite recording will be uploaded to YouTube as well. So if you are unable to hear or grasp something in Big Blue Button, you can have a look at the copy on YouTube, as I'm using two different platforms to record uh, this satellite tutorials. For the Big Blue Button, I'm using Big Blue Button to record this session, as well as for YouTube, there is another software called Loom that I'm using to record. So if one program fails, the other one should be able to fill in that gap. Alright, so if you have any questions, any queries with regards to employment relations in Germany, feel free to send me an email. Email address is already there on Moodle. And for next satellite tutorial, please have a read about employment relations in Sweden. Alright, thank you all.